Hello OTF and good day. Welcome to your quick demonstration of the Augur system set up for you at otf.augurlabs.io:3333. If you ever want to get home, click Augur. Once you've clicked Augur, you'll see that your repositories are organized into two project groups. One is OTF, the other is the Signal app. The Signal app reflects all 54 repositories that you identified in the Signal app organization on GitHub, and these four are discrete repositories that you identified. 3 of them are not on GitHub, one of them is. That'll become relevant in a minute. Let's take a look at the Signal Server app specifically to get started. When we click the Signal Server app, you'll see a number of tabs appear here. The first is Git, that's the tab that we're on, and it's providing information about the Git Signal Server or Signal Server-Git project, and you will see that the top repos by commits with a baseline average and the top repos by net lines of code for 2018 with a baseline average is here. The baseline average is the line, so it's not zero set in both cases. You'll also see that there are 2 y-axes for net lines of code and commits. So the numbers actually go down for some of the net lines of code if those numbers are lower than the average net lines of code committed. And you can see in this project, which is focused on commits, or this graph, which is focused on commits, that original protocol JavaScript is your #1 repository by commits. If we jump over here to top repos by net lines of code, you can see that AES GCM Provider is the top repo by net lines of code changed. If we scroll down to the next graph, this gives you a general idea of the activity over the calendar year 2018. And this is a parameterizable graph, so we could also look at the last 12 months, but we use 2018 for convenience of demonstration. You'll see that in January, the net lines changed and the commits were lower. So the average net lines of code was somewhere between 0 and 500, probably 230 or something. And the net average commits by month was around 5. And you can see that these numbers are lower from period to period. Sometimes, if you remember, if you look at the blue, which is commits, you might accidentally look over at the y-axis for net lines of code and say, how could commits be 0? It's actually that the y-axis for commits are over here, and there's just a very small number of commits. The red is net lines of code changed, and you can see that this is also relatively low compared to the average for the early part of the year. And then you can see from September onward, the average is bulked up for the year by these very active folks at that later part of the year. If the Signal app had had any new repositories in 2018, they would show up here, but it did not. Down here, you'll see the lines of code added by the top 10 authors for the life of the Git repository on the x-axis, and then the authors on the y-axis. You can see that Moxie at thoughtcrime.org has been a heavy contributor all along, and that Moxie plus GitHub at signal.org, likely the same person, is a heavy contributor from April 2018 onward. You can map any email addresses that represent the same person into a common person so that they would show up only using the canonical email address in these graphs if you want to. We can show you how to do that. The tick marks is just another way of visualizing this information. So in the case of some repositories, and this is not a bad example, you can see that with the circles, the level of contribution from Moxie at thoughtcrime, it has a lot of overlap. The tick chart gives you a finer grained sense of specifically when that activity occurred. Down here, we'll look at the lines of code added by the top 10 authors as percentages of total lines of code added, as well as the average lines of code per commit. Here, it's organized by month from January 2014 through the current time. You can also look at it as a continuous graph or simply by year. Over here at the average lines of code per commit, you can see Git at bluemail.me has the top total lines of code per commit. But if we go to the net lines of code per commit, Action at signal.org has slightly greater net lines of code, which just means that Git at bluemail.me has a lot more deletes in their code. They're probably doing a lot of refactoring work, would be my guess. And then if we just look at straight up lines added, Git at bluemail.me is also in the top. Finally, down here, you can see a grid of data for the top lines of code added by the top 10 authors for each year. But wait, there's more. You can also see the monthly detail for each of those authors and get back to the years by clicking on the year. So if we want to look back at 2019 or 2018, I can click. You can see that there are a lot more lines of code added, just as we saw in the graphs above, during November and September. Now you'll also see that there are a lot of net lines of code added in lines of code added in March, but there was probably also a lot of lines of code removed in this effort, so it showed up as a lower level of overall effort with fewer total commits. Finally, down here you can look at it by organization. Any organization can be mapped to an individual, any individual to an organization for a set period of time. That's another mapping activity that we can walk you through. All of this information comes directly off of the Git repository that we retrieved either from GitHub or elsewhere. The same is true for the Overview tab, which gives you the project overview for the Signal app, which is the same information at the top of the Git page, but clearly states that this page is only about the Signal app's overview and lists the same repositories I reviewed before. Hi, I'm Sean Goggins with the Chaos Project and Augur. Thanks so much for listening to this short demo. I have one more coming your way that will explain some of Augur's additional features and talk about the data that's not yet on our front end. Looking forward to speaking with you again after you've had a chance to look at your instance of Augur.